friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie, yo 760. Tighten that neighborhood, my brothers and sisters. As we proceed to give you what you need, it is that time of the week when we get to go back to Mike from that chapter. It is always a delight when we get to go back to Mike. And the title of the video is Jealous Wife Poison City to Cover Boring Husband's Murder. Now, I got a lot of questions with this title, y'all. But first of all, I just wonder, what do Mike really mean by Poison City? Like, do he mean that, like, literally, like, this freaking lady was poisoning everybody in the damn city? Or is he kind of exaggerating it? You know what I'm saying, man? And then, what's up with this whole boring husband? You know what I'm saying? Is that her calling her husband boring? And that's the reason she wanted to freaking murder him, because he was not wild and crazy and fun enough? I don't know, big team. As y'all can see, I'm reading a lot into the title. But we gonna go get into the video. But before we get into it, y'all know what y'all got to do. Get whatever you may need. Get what you need, please. It is another That Chapter Wednesday. Y'all got what y'all need. Y'all ready to go? Then let's go.
Criminals will often go to the strangest lengths to cover up their crimes, but there aren't many cases out there, or at least that I've heard of, that really come close to this one. Because when a woman wasn't happy with her partner, she thought the best way to cover up one murder was to go and commit a city's worth. Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this solo video, I have a story for you that is about as twisting and turning as I don't know, like a snake or something like that. And it's definitely one of those, you know, and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't such a goddamn idiot. Please subscribe to see new stories from the dark every single Tuesday. Now, this story, give it a go, we shall do.
Let's give it a go and get whatever you may need.
This story begins at around 6:30 a.m. June 11th, 1986. Susan Snow was up with her daughter Haley for, it was just the start of another school day. Haley, 15 years of age, was getting ready to head into high school, while her mom, Susan Snow, 40 years of age, was heading into work at the Puget Sound National Bank, where she worked as the assistant vice president. Susan's husband Paul had already left for his own job, so Susan got up, she went into her daughter Haley's bedroom and woke her up, and then Haley went into her own bathroom to, have a shower before starting the day. While showering, Haley could hear her mom in her own bathroom just on the other side of the wall. She could hear her mom turn on the faucet, but then, after a few minutes, she heard this loud thud. At first thinking, oh man, it's like my mom fallen. But then she was thinking, I'm probably just thinking it. I'm sure she probably just dropped something big in the bathroom and it just, echoed off of all the tiles. So she paid no mind and she continued showering. She then, got out of the shower, went into her bedroom, started applying makeup before school. As Haley was doing that, though, she realized she could still hear the faucet in her mom's bathroom. That was when Haley, now slightly worried, walked out and walked into her mom's room. No one was there, but she could still hear the faucet running in her mom's, ensuite. So she opened the door and walked into her mom's bathroom and was met by just a horrifying sight. Her mom, Susan, was lying on the cold tiles in her bathrobe. The sink beside her was overflowing, but her mom looked pale She didn't look like she was breathing much, and her eyes were wide open. It was at 6:43 a.m. that Haley called 911. The fire department, they arrived 4 minutes later. Susan was still alive, but she was gasping for breath while lying on the bathroom floor. Her eyes just completely open, but fixed, dilated. As the paramedics had a hard time working on her, and Haley saying, she had heard this bang coming from the bathroom, the paramedics were working under the assumption that she had fallen, slipped, and hit her head, on the cold tiles or something like that. But the thing was, she wasn't exhibiting any of the symptoms to go along with a head injury. Susan was rushed to the hospital, her daughter Haley followed, and Haley was soon joined by Connie Snow, her biological father, and Paul Webking, who was her stepfather and Susan Snow's second husband. Unfortunately, however, for Susan, there was nothing that could be done. Her brain was swollen, she was in a coma, and not long later she was pronounced brain dead. She'd woken up at 6:30 a.m. 911 had been called at around 6:43 a.m. and by 11 a.m. they were saying, she's not going to make it. The doctor was asking her family, do you give us permission to switch off life support? The family, as you can imagine, it's like their life just changed in the blink of an eye. The family agreed. There was absolutely no chance though of recovery for Susan Snow. It's it started off like a Groundhog Day, like any other day, and then in just a couple of hours, everything had turned upside down. Everything's
seriously, y'all, they life changed so quickly, man, just over a span of a few freaking hours. At the top of the morning, the start of the what you think is just gonna be another beautiful day in the neighborhood, but this day turned bad quickly. And I'm just sitting right here wondering, I don't think she just fell and hit her head, so I'm wondering, did somebody come in the home and just hit her across the head with something like a sledgehammer, just to, you know what I'm saying, just saying something real strong like that, and cause this type of brain damage to the point where this lady is on life support just hours later? This is some strong, blunt force trauma being team. Let's find out.
Groundhog Day until it's not, and it's always when you least expect it. The entire Susan Snow death was completely baffling to everybody. The police, they, as you can imagine, they were talking to Haley. Haley was like, she came in this morning, she was grand. The night before, we had a barbecue. Life was good. It's a summer in Washington, the state of Washington. And then she just drops dead like this. And the paramedics, as I said, they even had it was confusing for them with how to treat her. Her breathing was getting ragged and just deteriorating. It's like she was breathing, but she couldn't get enough air. Who knew her and who had been there when her life ended?
Hold on, time out. Now I'm looking at the freaking title again, Bean Team. Did this lady get poisoned? Is this symptoms of being poisoned? You know what I'm saying? Because I'm waiting on Mike to say something about she had a head injury somewhere, but he ain't never said that yet. As far as a visible injury, I don't freaking know. I'm just wondering, Bean Team. I'm just wondering, and I'm just saying, let's go.
I've noticed a few more gray hairs start to poke through, and more I think to myself, I should probably go to the doctor for this or that, skin, teeth.
I think Mike at his commercial, y'all. Let's see. Yeah, he had his commercial. But I'm just saying, man, I'm trying to come up with how the freak did this happen. Now I'm looking at the title and thinking maybe she had been getting poisoned over time and she just fell out and her brain had got all effed up from the poisoning that was going on. I don't know, y'all. Let's go.
Susan Snow was a well-liked person in the area. She'd worked at the bank for many years. She'd even left her husband, Connie, who worked at Boeing. She'd left him to go and start dating somebody at the bank. It wasn't much of a surprise to other people who worked at the bank then that Susan Snow got a lot more promotions than everybody else who worked there too. Everybody really liked Susan. In fact, all of their clients at the bank would always specifically request Susan to do their, banking deals or whatever it was. Connie Snow, her ex-husband and Haley's father, he had been the extremely jealous type. He had tried his darndest to get back with Connie even when she started, fooling around with other people. Even, he'd work at Boeing, and on his lunch breaks, he would take it to following her around and stalking her. Seeing if she was meeting up with other men. She was meeting up with other men. And Susan Snow would later be introduced to a Paul Webking. He would be her second husband, and they were introduced by Susan Snow's eldest daughter, who now at this point was living in New Mexico. Paul Webking, her now new husband, was he's one of them interesting characters. He was a long haul trucker, which, covering true crime, long haul truckers they come up a little bit, they come up just a tad. And he was somebody who made an impression on every single person he met, including and especially his 3 ex-wives. Before being a long-haul truck driver, he had done sort of a little bit of everything. And now he was doing Susan. And researching into him, he's a bit of a Karen type, Paul Webking. He sort of would, demand to speak to the manager quite frequently. It seemed like overall, Paul and Susan had been pretty happy together. And, according to Haley, they'd been happy enough. So how had Susan just simply died? They couldn't explain how she had died. The autopsy of Susan Snow revealed actually not a lot, to be fair. They still didn't know how she actually died. Susan Snow, she was 40 years of age, she was not a drug abuser, relatively healthy by all accounts. The initial theory was that she had slipped in the shower and, traumatic brain injury hitting those cold, hard tiles. But speaking to Haley would be like, no. My mom always takes a shower in the evening. She never takes one before work. So she wasn't in the shower. Haley said she heard her mom walk into the bathroom, turn on the faucet, heard a loud thunk, end of story. And Susan didn't have any, head wounds on her. I mean, she had wounds because she had fallen, but not, serious head wounds that would cause brain swelling and death. She had been in trouble before she hit the deck. The bathroom she had been in was examined. Her curling iron, which was in there too, that was examined. I mean, one of the possible theories was had she been electrocuted. But checking the socket, the power hadn't tripped, so there hadn't been a power surge or anything like that. It still worked fine. So it wasn't electrocution. They checked the pills and medication she had in the bathroom. There was nothing there crazy that would have killed her instantly. None were found in her stomach either, apart from basically the remains of 2 Excedrin were found in her stomach, and Susan Snow took 2 Excedrins every single morning. Excedrin, you've probably taken it in your life. It's basically just aspirin and paracetamol for headaches, for migraines, and Susan Snow often suffered from headaches and migraines. The bottle of
That's my go-to freaking painkiller, Excedrin.
Excedrin they found was almost full, so it wasn't like she guzzled a load of them down. Now though, one interesting thing had occurred during the medical examination of Susan Snow's body. It was dismissed at the time, but now with explanations sort of coming up empty, they began to return to it. As the head doctor, was cutting through Susan Snow's skin, the assistant pathologist made a remark. As soon as the knife touched her skin and her body, opened up, she said she smelled bitter almonds emanating from Susan Snow's body. Now, the doctor couldn't smell it, but her assistant could, which was weird. The doctor, not being able to smell it, didn't notice anything. And that's the thing about cyanide. Not everybody can smell it. It's bizarre. 60% of the population can smell it. The other 40% of people, they don't carry the gene necessary to be able to detect the smell of cyanide, which I've never smelled it, but allegedly it smells like almonds, nutty. It's very strong, bitter, nutty smell. The assistant, they had that gene, so they spoke up immediately as soon as, she was able to, she detected it. And she said, I smell cyanide. It might sound crazy, but did this woman take Tylenol? She asked that question about the Tylenol because only 4 years earlier in Chicago, 7 people died from ingesting Tylenol that was laced with cyanide.
Oh.
Cyanide-contaminated Tylenol has been responsible for 3 deaths in the Arlington Heights area. Do not take Tylenol until further notice.
Arlington Heights police demonstrated tonight how they have been warning residents throughout the day. And in Chicago, police notified all officers of the threat.
This product may be contaminated with cyanide and should be destroyed.
It was completely random. These people, they just bought Tylenol in the store and it had been poisoned. Multiple agencies investigated. They found all the poison bottles had come from the same lot, and they were actually recalled. They had been manufactured in Pennsylvania and in Texas, but it appeared that these Tylenol bottles in the city of Chicago had been tampered with after being placed on the shelves. Someone had come in, taken the Tylenol off the shelf, replaced some of the pills with cyanide capsules, boink, back on the shelf, and 7 people died. To this day, nobody knows who was behind the Chicago Tylenol poisonings. So now, a couple of years later, you have almost a very similar sort of situation starting to appear. Now, again, this was in Washington, fair distance away from Chicago, but worth looking into had Susan somehow gotten her hands on a bottle of Tylenol that had made its way all the way over. So now, with all the theories sort of being like dead ends, guess what the toxicology report showed up? Susan Snow had a metric shit ton of cyanide in her system, and it didn't seem like Susan Snow had done it to herself. I say that because cyanide is not a pretty way to go. It's not cinematic. The way cyanide works, and it can take minutes or hours depending on the dosage, is it stops blood cells from absorbing oxygen. So basically, it suffocates you to death, and that's exactly what happened to Susan. When the paramedics got in there, and when Haley found her on the floor of the bathroom, Susan was like gasping for breath. But no matter how much she breathed in, her body couldn't absorb the air she was taking in. So then her brain wasn't getting any oxygen, leading to brain death, which is exactly what happened to her. So how did the cyanide get into her system? Well, much like in the Tylenol case, things were starting to rhyme for detectives. Susan took 2 extra strong Excedrin tablets every morning. She had chronic headaches. It's possible then the Excedrin had been tainted, as that's likely the only thing that she would have had in her system, and then that's what killed her. But if that was the case, who had tainted them? The police, they went in, they grabbed the bottle of Excedrin, which was almost full, that was in her bathroom, and they were these little capsules, took them apart, there's white powder in them, began testing all the white powder, and they found that in the 60 capsule Excedrin bottle, 11 of them had been tainted with cyanide.
Wow, that's it, Bean Team. And I started to catch on to it a little earlier. I was like, hold on, is this lady poisoned? Because she really don't have no head injury. But now in this case, that the police know that she been poisoned, man, from cyanide. A similar thing with the thing that happened with the Tylenol in another case, which the killer we still to this day don't know who the freak did it. For all we know, they still free and alive to this day. But I'm wondering, y'all, and it got to point to one person to me right now. Jealous wife poisons city to cover boring husband's murder. So is this her new wife? Not her new wife. Her new husband who did this, y'all? He gotta be it. It wasn't her little girl Haley. I highly doubt that. Let's find out.
So the police began to look at Paul Webking, attitude man himself. Had you gotten such an attitude, you put cyanide in a tablet. Who knows? He had left now earlier that same morning, just a couple of hours before this had all gone down, and the police would remark he seemed oddly unemotional about his wife's death. And at one point, Paul literally took Haley aside, his stepdaughter. He took her aside and said to her, "We were the only 2 people who were living in the house. We were the only 2 people who were there that morning. We are prime suspects. The police is going to think it's us." Was it? Paul would also say that he frequently took Excedrin too, and that he would say he had actually taken 2 tablets that same morning, just a couple of hours before Susan had. And he would say, "Geez, I could have been killed. Maybe, what are the odds that I took 2 tablets that didn't have a cyanide in them from this one small bottle?" He takes 2 and is fine, Susan takes 2 and is dead. The police didn't believe he had taken any that morning. The police also learned that he had had an affair with an old flame from school not long before. An affair Susan had found out about, and if you can believe it, she wasn't best pleased. She was pretty mad about that. A notebook of Sue's was found where she had written, "Fuck Paul. I hate Mary. I hate Paul." Which is fair. I mean, she hated him, but she loved him. It was kind of like one of those sorts of dealios. And Paul was always pissed off that Sue, as an assistant vice president at this bank, the Puget Sound National Bank, Paul was always really pissed off that she made more money of him. The thing was, though, neither of them made a whole lot, but they were spending like there was no tomorrow. They were flashing the cash every chance they could. So had Paul had enough of that and made his wife leave by way of coffin. Even when the police were able to confirm with Paul how his wife had died, they said to him, yep, the capsules she had taken, they were tainted. Paul would immediately replied, yep, that's what I expected. The police were like, really? You expected that? I wouldn't have. Paul had been one of the first to suggest tainted medication. I mean, I'm guessing the Tylenol murders must have been pretty fresh in everybody's mind because that was like one of the first things they went to, but it's just kind of weird. So detectives started to become pretty convinced that Paul Webking had murdered his wife. But there was, of course, the potential that there was a copycat to the Tylenol poisonings, copycat out there. So they couldn't really play around with this. They made this like a statewide emergency. They began to try and seize as many bottles of Excedrin as they could from stores. This was in the newspaper. It was on the news. It was a pretty big deal. The company who made this extra strength Excedrin, they began a nationwide recall, which, as you can imagine, like that cost them millions. And they still didn't know if it was just in this one isolated case of Paul doing it. However, as the testing of more and more products began and the FBI got involved, police just became more and more convinced that Paul murdered his wife. It just fit. And all the other Excedrin bottles they got were coming up clean. It was like, they were like, it was a wild goose chase. Until it wasn't a wild goose. It wasn't actually a wild goose chase, because on June 19th, guess what? Another call came in. A woman was on the line. She was hysterical. She was having like a conniption on the end of the line, and she was saying to report that her husband had passed away recently. And guess what? This woman was saying, she was like, I was just watching the telly. I'm seeing this news about Excedrin, about this woman dying. It's crazy, and there's this big huge recall and big huge investigation. And she said, I just found 2 bottles of Excedrin in my home, and I'm not sure how my husband died, but he died like, 2 weeks ago. She even checked the Excedrin bottles that she'd found in her home, and they're all the same like lot number as the one found in Susan Snow's house, the ones that were being recalled. So an officer drove over to where she lived, and when he met her, he was kind of like thinking, she's a far cry from the hysterical woman who was just on the phone, and she kind of reeked of gin a little bit. But, worth a chat too. He walked over to her place. She lived in this trailer in the middle of the woods, this like tiny little trailer where she lived by herself, and she introduced herself, and she said, hey, my name is Stella Nichol. Pleased to meet you. She said she had just been watching the TV and she'd seen the news report about Susan Snow, who lived in the same city, and saw the similarities between what had happened to her husband, a guy named Bruce Nichol, and Susan. And her husband had died only a couple of days before Susan had died. Now, the initial cause of death of her husband was undetermined, but they would eventually just write down his cause of death, Bruce Nichol's cause of death, as emphysema. He had been a heavy smoker, but had stopped, but it caught up with him. Stella, however, she really doubted that that's how he died. And if you'll remember, the investigators only came across the cyanide poisoning basically by accident. Stella would say that her husband Bruce, he'd been complaining about headaches a lot before he died, and he'd been taking 3 to 4 Excedrins a day for about a week. Stella gave the officer the 2 bottles that she had found in her home that had the same lot numbers, and the officer, he took them back to be tested to check if there was actually cyanide in those pills. Calls were made to the hospital where Bruce Nichol had been sent to, asking, have you tested him for cyanide poisoning? The hospital replied, no, why would we? And now he's buried in the ground. Police tested the bottles that Stella had given them, and lo and behold, there was cyanide. There were cyanide capsules in those bottles, in both of those bottles she'd given them.
And that's so crazy to me, y'all, because I was really sitting right here thinking like that this was like an isolated incident this time. You know what I'm saying? I'm thinking it was Suzanne husband who had did this ish. And lo and behold, this is a whole different case. And we done went from Tylenol to Excedrin. And now I'm wondering, it's the same person who committed those Tylenol murders. It's the one who doing it with the estrogen. Like Mike say, I say Excedrin. I call it freaking Excedrin. But I'm wondering, y'all, like, is this the same killer or is this like a new killer? Is this a copycat killer? I just hope this killer gets found before we get to the end of this video, Bean Team. Let's continue.
Bruce's cause of death was still undetermined. A vial of his blood had been kept to continue testing. They tested that for cyanide, and it confirmed what they suspected. Bruce Nichol had died of cyanide poisoning too. He had been the first to die of cyanide poisoning, and then about a week later in the same city, Susan Snow died of the very same thing, taken in the very same form, Excedrin capsules. The police were thinking now, oh shite, we got one of them mass killers.
Residents living in the Seattle area have been warned to avoid all over-the-counter drugs in capsule form following yet another case of cyanide tampering.
On June 5th, 1986, which was 6 days before Susan Snow got up for work that morning, 52-year-old Bruce Nichol had, he'd been at work all day. He worked for the Department of Transportation. He arrived home to the trailer where he lived with his wife Stella, arrived home at like 4:50 p.m. Back from another day on the rig, back home to his beautiful wife Stella, and she was there, cooking up some grub for her hard-working man. Bruce Nichol, he got home, had a wash, sat down on the couch, munching away in his grub, and then he took 4 of those Excedrin capsules. Then Bruce went out for a walk to just gulp down some fresh air after dinner, came back inside the trailer, took a 1 step, took a 2 step, and then dunk, collapsed in front of the couch right by the television. Much like with Sue, Stella grabbed the phone, she dialed 911 saying her husband, he's on the floor, he's non-responsive, he's breathing, but he's gasping, and she doesn't know what to do. He was rushed to hospital, but he would pass away that very night. And Stella, she was much like Paul Webking. She would say too, I had just been taking capsules from that very same bottle of Excedrin. That could be me collapsing on the floor in front of the TV. So the ruling for Bruce Nichol's death was emphysema, but Stella, she had a feeling there was something more going on here. Just didn't sit right in her head. She called the hospital again and again, asking if there'd been any update, something like that, but the doctors, they would say, we're not exactly sure how he died, but we're just chalking it up to emphysema. That was then until like 2 weeks later. Stella is flaked out on the couch. She sees a news report about Susan Snow and she's like, that's the exact same thing that just happened to my husband. Down to the very same bottle of pills coming from the very same lot. The police would also search Stella's trailer, much like they had searched Stella's home. And while they were searching her place, Stella's daughter Cindy was like in her 20s, was grown up. She arrived home and is like, my mom didn't hurt him. My mom didn't hurt Bruce. I mean, no one was thinking that, but it's good you said it. Cindy was the stepdaughter of Bruce, and she said, yeah, Bruce, he often took painkillers, he had a lot of headaches, he worked with a lot of heavy machinery, working for the Department of Transport. He had previously been a big old drinker, loved a few gulps, but Stella had given him an ultimatum a couple of years previously. Basically, Stella had gone to her husband Bruce and said, it's me or the bottle. Bruce picked Stella. Cindy would say Stella and Bruce, they loved each other. There had been no extramarital affairs, no money issues, no real major issues. At least none that Cindy, trying to give information, that she was aware of between her mom and her now dead stepfather. The thing is though, well, what Cindy didn't know could fill a book. Stella had grown up in a very abusive household and she saw violence a lot from her own stepfather, who was a real piece of shit. And that violence that Stella saw as a kid kind of bled into her. She would also act out very, very aggressively. And Stella Nichol's own childhood was full of like these really, really tragic events. Her mom, who had a great taste in men, would often leave the kids home alone a lot. And this led to like some really dark incidents. Like one time Stella got horrible burns all over her legs and had to be hospitalized for 2 months getting skin grafts. Then, the same thing almost happened again when the house went on fire another time, when Stella's mom had left the kids at home alone, but this time Stella's younger brother, sadly, he perished in a house fire. This affected the family and Stella immensely. Stella, the way she took it was she started dating a lot of older men, which was really not a good thing for her. One of these men ended up raping Stella when she was just a teen, and she became pregnant, and he followed up that move with another one when he asked Stella to marry him, and shockingly, Stella said she was not interested in that whatsoever. She began dating a new fella and managed to convince this guy that the child was his. In 1959, she gave birth to her daughter Cynthia, Cindy. Stella was then about to marry this second guy, but he backed out at the very last minute. Stella, though, did get into serious trouble once for fraud. Stella was living with her new husband Bill and her daughter Cindy, and Stella's cousin and her husband were due to come spend some time with Stella for a bit. And because Stella's cousin and her husband were both on welfare, they had to write to welfare saying, send the checks to Stella's place. We're going to be staying with them for a while. And then kind of, for one reason or another, her cousin and her husband, they couldn't make it. But their checks were still making it to Stella. And Stella, getting these checks for welfare, was like, yoink, mine, my money. This went on for a surprisingly long time, until her cousin figured out what she was doing and called the police for fraud and forgery, as Stella was forging her cousin's signature. And Stella ended up doing 6 months in prison for that little snafu. This is just like, kind of bad shit after bad shit. Sort of like swimming in a septic tank. And so it was at a bar of all places, if you can believe it, folks. It was at a bar that Stella met Bruce. He was enchanted from first beer goggles, and soon they shacked up, all 3 of them, in this little trailer in the woods with a beautiful aquarium, courtesy of Stella Nickel, soon to be Stella Nickel, as she would take his name, marrying him. Bruce and Stella, they married in 1976, and Stella was still out at the bar every night looking for new lads, looking for the new fellas around town, looking for fresh meat. Bruce, in response to this, kind of dove more and more headfirst into the bottle, and it started to kill him, the amount he was drinking. He was spending about $250 a week on alcohol, which, I mean, back in, the 70s, 80s, I don't know how much money that is, but it's a lot. It sounds like a lot of money now. Stella eventually became so worried that she sent him to therapy, and it worked. Bruce did quit drinking. Kinda. So it worked for Bruce. He was doing great. Quit the drinking, vowed never to have another drop again, was healthier, all that good stuff. He was doing great. Stella, though, she kind of preferred him as an alco. She was a bit like, it's great, you quit, your addiction, you're doing great, pal, but you're kind of boring now. We used to go out drinking, partying, doing all sorts of shenanigans, and now you just want to stay at home and watch TV all day. This is, and Stella, she has a lot of impulse, non-control, so she was not too keen. She kind of started to resent Bruce for his sobriety and all of that, because Stella was like the opposite of that. She was to the excess in everything. Stella began to think about leaving Bruce, and she began to think about other things too. One time, Bruce had to go to Alaska for work, and so Stella thought, yippee, finally free of, we can start finally having a little fun around here. Her daughter Cindy, who was growing up, by this stage, and Cindy's boyfriend Dave, they moved into the trailer. They were like, we'll stay with you, while Bruce is gone. Cindy and Dave broke up for whatever reason while they were there. And then Stella started jumping into bed with her daughter's ex-boyfriend. That's pretty psychotic behavior. It only ended when Bruce finally came home from Alaska. And now Bruce was dead. They did not know.
That's crazy work right there. That is some real crazy work by Stella right there. Stella got her groove back with her freaking daughter's ex. That's crazy, man. But no, this whole thing is just crazy, y'all. Like, seriously, man. It just the audacity, like, lady, you wanted me to get sober, and now that I'm sober, you want me to be a drunk again. You need to make up your goddamn mind. Seriously.
Each other, Bruce and Susan, for as far as anybody knew. And no one knew where the bottles had came from. There was no fingerprints found on any of the bottles to identify who had tampered with the Excedrin. Now, Paul Webking, he was soon cleared. Didn't seem like he had murdered his wife, and if he had murdered his wife, had he murdered Bruce? Because whoever murdered Susan had murdered Bruce. And it didn't seem like Paul had anything to do with Bruce Nichols' death a week earlier. And a lot of people did come forward to, in fairness now, to speak in Paul Webking's defense. His 3 ex-wives, they all said, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Bit of an asshole, but he wouldn't kill. And he passed the polygraph, so he was pretty quickly cleared. Full examinations of Excedrin bottles were done, like thousands and thousands and thousands of bottles were done across the state of Washington, across really the nation, across the nation. It was found only one more bottle was found to have cyanide in it. So that makes 4 bottles were found to have cyanide in it. Susan Snow's bottle, 2 of Stella's bottles, and then 1 more randomly found. Which made this situation very weird. Like, what are the odds that out of the thousands and thousands of bottles that were recalled, Susan Snow would buy one that had cyanide in it and then die? What was even weirder was that out of the thousands and thousands, Stella had gotten 2. What are the odds of that? So someone...
I know, right? Like, that's when the odds get almost impossible, man. Ain't no way in the hell you got 2 of the freaking bottles out of these thousands, you know what I'm saying, that got the cyanide, unless you the one who putting the ish up in there. And we know it's her now, Bean Team, because she is the jealous wife in Poison City, so... I don't know, I guess she decided not only to poison her husband, but she put it up in some of the other bottles. This lady was just crazy anyway. Let's keep listening to the craziness of her.
Was going into stores, carefully opening the bottles, removing some regular capsules, and putting in their own homebrew capsules. But one thing really stuck out to the investigators as they were examining the cyanide found in all of these capsules. And that was, so they would open the capsule and there'd be this white powder. The cyanide powder. But examining it under a microscope, there was also these very teeny tiny green crystals in amongst the powder. No idea what those green crystals were, because they're not cyanide. That was something else. Likely some other residue or substance that had been, where the cyanide had been kept. They tested those green crystals and it was found to be algicide, which is, it's a formula you'd put in aquariums and fish tanks to prevent the growth of algae. And these crystals could actually be traced to a very particular brand of algicide called Algae Destroyer. It was like only that brand used that specific chemical makeup. And Stella did have an aquarium in her trailer. The police then began visiting, in Auburn, Washington, the police began visiting aquarium, pet stores, all that sort of stuff, going one by one to the employees there, asking, do you sell Algae Destroyer? And then showing pictures of people involved in the case. Showing pictures of Stella. And one of the managers in one of these stores said, yeah, she's been coming in here. She buys Algae Destroyer. I don't even like stocking Algae Destroyer because it's sold in these little kind of brick type things. And if it gets moisture in it, they turn rock hard. I only sell it because she uses it. Everybody else uses like a liquid form to kill algae, but she specifically wants this brand, so he only stocks it for her. He said he spoke to Stella about it a few times, and he said that, when you're using this particular brand, this Algae Destroyer, you have to crush it down, and that will help it mix in your aquarium better. So had Stella been crushing Algae Destroyer, and then in like a mortar and pestle or something like that, and then also made cyanide in that same utensil. The thing about Stella is, if she had never called the police claiming that her husband could also have been killed by cyanide, the police never would have come near her. She brought the police to her own door.
Boy, that's a great point that I forgot all about in the story, Bean Team. The fact that she the one who even called the police and alerted them to her. You know what I'm saying? It's almost like she was just telling on herself, or she just couldn't help herself. You know how some of these murderers are out here, especially like serial killer type, which I'm thinking she was trying to be. But you know how some of them be, man. It's like they gotta keep on killing, or they gotta keep leaving these different clues or whatever till they end up getting caught, end up telling on themselves. That's crazy. I forgot all about that part. Wow.
You got to wonder big if at this point, if she was involved, why had she done that? Why had she called the police, directing their attention to her? Well, if she was responsible for tainting the pills, maybe she heard about Susan Snow's death and she feared she might kill more people, so she wanted to alert the police and hopefully get those tainted bottles off the shelves. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me though. Like, if she only wanted to kill her husband, like, why put the public at risk, which would eventually kill some other Susan Snow? Like, why, if you're just trying to kill one person, why try and poison the city, essentially? I mean, if she had done it, she must have known that was a possibility, a likelihood that somebody else could have died. Possibly dozens of people, possibly like kids could have taken that stuff. Doctors did say that she kept calling after Bruce's death, asking for, have you got a new cause of death? Have you found out something else? And they were saying, no, natural causes, emphysema. And Stella was like, that doesn't sit right with me. I feel like there's something more going on here. Maybe she felt if she kept pushing, they would discover the cyanide, and maybe then that would lead to the discovery of the poison pills in the pharmacies in the city. Well, then there's also good old...
Oh my God.
Bruce had a policy. He had a
Freaking
work
life,
policy.
freaking insurance policy, Bean Team. It strikes again. It never freaking fails.
That said, if he died of natural causes on the job, his wife, Stella, would get like $5,000. Something like that. But if Bruce died of accidental causes, she would get like $175,000. Bruce's death was ruled as natural causes, but then later, discovering the cyanide, it was ruled as accidental causes. Bruce had signed that policy 6 months before his death. Or someone pretending to be Bruce had signed it, because the signature did not match at all. And didn't Stella have a history of forging signatures when she had committed fraud with her cousin's welfare checks? Bruce and Stella were like $20,000 in debt, actually more than that, and North Pacific Bank had a lien against their trailer, and it was demanding money back. By April of 1986, they hadn't paid any of their like debts in since September. They had received one final letter demanding like $2,000 in April of 1986. Stella wrote back. Clackety-clackety. She wrote back to the bank saying, well, actually, this is what she said. Dear sirs, I know that I am tremendously overdue with my payments. There is a good reason for it. I'm having marital problems. They are about solved, and I would like to ask if you will have faith in me, personally. Bruce is no longer involved, and I would like a chance for me to prove my worth to you. That was 2 months before Bruce died, so the problem was about to be solved. Stella, she was taken in for questioning, and she continued with the story of just randomly purchasing those 2 bottles. She didn't poison jack shit. She did admit that she had forged Bruce's, or done Bruce's signature on the life insurance policy, but she was sure I do all of that sort of thing. He knew about it. Wasn't a big deal. And you know what? She just happened to have purchased those 2 poison pill bottles out of the 15,000 that were in circulation in the area. What are the odds, though, that Stella would purchase those 2? And bad luck just follows her everywhere. At first, she said she wouldn't do a lie detector test. Then she said she would, and the lie detector test found her to be, well, the lie detector test didn't even do that, thing. It literally just wrote out yes at the end. However, there wasn't any real evidence. Other than the astronomical odds of her purchasing 2 of those pill bottles and the algae destroyer that was found inside all the cyanide pills, it was basically a circumstantial look. There was no real evidence pointing to Stella having murdered her husband and then sent out, could have possibly murdered how many other people, and did murder Susan Snow. It was then that Cindy called the police, good old Cindy, who Stella used to beat the ever-living shite out of. Now, one thing to note is that there was a reward from the pharmaceutical company for $250,000. A reward, information leading to an arrest. So Cindy, well, she probably had issues with her mom, and then hearing about that money, she was licking her chops. She called up the police and said, I can tell you a couple of things about Stella. I mean, there's the fact that she used to beat the shit out of her, and then she slept with her ex-boyfriend. So that won't put you on best terms. And so Cindy would say, Stella mentioned a lot actually about the things she would like to do to Bruce to get him out of the picture. Because she couldn't divorce Bruce Nichol because, of the financial difficulties they would have, and, Stella would lose half of what she had. And what she had was jack shit. So and he's got a life insurance policy, so ding ding. So boring Bruce, well, maybe we can, make him go. And Cindy would say Stella had talked about everything from hiring a hitman, to cutting his brakes wildcard style, to, even going to the library and looking up poisons, toxic stuff. It's like the poisoner's manifesto. She was going to the Auburn Public Library and taking out books, reading up on different types of toxins. She'd even poisoned Bruce once before. By learning about this plant called foxglove, she found some grown near the trailer, chopped it up, fed it to Bruce. Gobble this. Bruce, he just had some stomach issues for a couple of days, so she was like, shit, She was telling all of this to Cindy, and Cindy just thought she was joking around. Classic knee slappers. Oh, Stella at it again. I mean, that's what she would say. I feel like Cindy probably knew her mother was being serious, but she didn't know about the reward. And then when she did know about the reward, well, it makes the decision pretty easy for you. The police were able to follow.
I agree with Mike too. I feel like her daughter, she knew that her mama wasn't joking when she was telling her all that ish. Cause you know how crazy your freaking mama is, man. Your mama was whooping your ass when you was a little child, and not in a good way. You know what I'm saying? Like literally torturing her when she was a little child. So you know your mama off her freaking rocker, and you know your mama would do some crazy ish like this. But it took when that award money came to the forefront. When she found out about that, she was like, you know what? I'm finna get this freaking money. Without that money being available, I don't know if she ever would have told on her mama. Or maybe she would, because I'm just thinking about just the fact that your mama slept with your ex-boyfriend. That is some crazy ish that I can't get up off of, Bean Team. Let's keep going. We almost through.
Open the library, see all of the books that Stella had withdrawn, and her fingerprints were even found on the books on specific pages about cyanide, about this, about that. And Cindy would also say that Stella had become obsessed with the Tylenol poisonings just a couple of years before in Chicago. She talked about it a lot. She wanted to recreate her own Tylenol poisoning right here. The target was the guy sleeping next to her. She did put poison capsules in stores around the town, but the ones that she gave to Bruce, oh no, she wanted to really make sure they did their job. So after Bruce left for work that day, she went downstairs, she took out the bottle of Exogen, opened up the capsule, emptied out the little white powder, and put in her own white powder, which was cyanide, into the capsule, put it back in. And then when he came home, shortly before 5 p.m., you have a headache like you've been having every day for the last week? Here, have some of these.
"44-year-old Stella Nickell was arrested at her home without incident. Police say she's been a suspect for months, but it took until now to finish the exhaustive investigation.
It is our understanding that this is the first case that has resulted in death in a product tampering case where an indictment or prosecution has resulted.
It is a case that drew national attention. Excedrin capsules were pulled from store shelves. Over 73,000 of them tested for poison. Police are accusing Stella Nickell of placing cyanide in 5 packages of over-the-counter painkillers. At a preliminary federal court hearing, Nickell appeared somber and said nothing.
Her trial began the following April. Cindy testified for the prosecution about the things she had heard and saw her mom do. Stella testified in her own defense, saying she loved Bruce and hadn't hurt anyone. However, at the end of the trial, Stella killed her husband and tried to cover up the murder of her husband by possibly, technically, she could have killed dozens of other people in the city. She did end up poisoning Susan Snow. Susan was simply unlucky enough to have randomly purchased one of the bottles that Stella had messed with. And Stella must have known that, there's a good chance somebody else will ingest the cyanide I've sprinkled throughout the city. If her husband's cyanide poisoning had been detected after he had died, instead of it being undetermined and emphysema, maybe they would have gathered the cyanide pills up there and done a sweep for Excedrin in the city before anybody else could have gotten those pill bottles. But, well, when that didn't happen, Stella was very happy to sit back on her big fat ass and be like, well, some other people, kids possibly, will take it and they'll die, but sure, shit happens. The judge would ultimately sentence Stella Nickell to 2 terms of 90 years in prison. Since then, Stella has maintained her innocence. She applied for parole in 2017. That was denied. She's still in prison to this day in Dublin, California. And it appears that she's 81 years of age today. She applied for compassionate release due to her failing health in 2022. That was also denied. So, sorry, Stella.
The South King County residents still clearly remember the troubling summer. In June 1986, 2 people in Auburn were killed by Excedrin painkillers laced with cyanide. This is Cairo 7 footage from the time.
triggered a nationwide recall of the Excedrin capsules and confiscation of all capsules in King County.
FBI investigators eventually found out Stella Nickell poisoned the capsules to kill her husband, Bruce Nickell. Then she planted bottles with cyanide-tainted pills at multiple shops, including this Pay 'n Save in Auburn and this Johnny's grocery store in Kent. So far, she's served more than 30 years. Now, this week, a handwritten letter from Stella Nickell petitions for early release. Nickell says because of health issues related to her age, the Bureau of Prisons cannot provide her with the medical care that she needs. She writes, "I believe I qualify for compassionate release." This is the first time Nickell is admitting to the crimes. In Nickell's petition filed with the U.S. District Court in Seattle, she says, "I truly and sincerely regret being responsible for the loss of those two precious lives."
Compassionate freaking release my mother freaking ass. You ain't getting no compassion over here. What you talking about because of my health? What about the health you caused to your freaking husband and that lady, Susan? You know what I'm saying? You caused their health to deteriorate so bad till they freaking died. What about that? At least you got to live all these freaking years. Your ass was in prison and now you're 81. But now since you're old and you're getting sick and stuff, you want us to care about your health when you ain't care about their freaking health? No, F that. Sit your old ass in there and rot. R-O-T. Rot.
And there you have it. That is the story of Stella Nickell and the Excedrin poisonings in Auburn, Washington. Stella literally killed her husband because he was too boring for her. That was the motive behind this horrifying murder. He just wasn't any crack anymore. He was boring as shite. So, I guess he's gotta go, but I do want his money. So let's just figure this out. Let's just make it up as we go along. And then she had to call the police, bringing them literally to her door. I mean, it's boring and greed, because she still would have gotten a percentage of the life insurance policy if they thought he had died of natural causes. But nope, she wanted the full thing, and so she brought the police to her door. If she hadn't done that, they wouldn't have found that she had an aquarium. They wouldn't have found all of these other things that ultimately led to her arrest. But, fellas out there, she killed because her husband was boring, so lesson learned. And because she testified against her mom, Cindy got $250K, so make of that what you will. Thank you so much for watching, folks. I hope you enjoyed this old video. It was quite the something. It was quite the something. As always, if you're looking for more of That Chapter, there's the That Chapter Patreon. For $2 a month, you get early access to all videos and Patreon exclusive videos, Patreon Discord, and you can check out the That Chapter podcast, which has a brand new shampoo podcast exclusive episode. Podcast only episodes are out every single Monday, available for free on all podcast platforms. So do yourself a favor and give it a go, or not really. I mean, you know, do what you like. I'm not the boss of you. You just take care of yourselves. That's the only thing I ask. Take care of yourselves and each other. Because I love you. Mike out.
Yeah, Bean Team, that one was a freaking, like Mike said, it was something, man. It was something like words can't even put into context. Seriously, what the freak we just heard with this freaking story, y'all. It was a journey, I guess I shall say, man, with a lot of ebbs and flows to it. At first, I was thinking that it was the Paul guy who killed Susan, but come to find out, it's a copycat, and I did say it's a copy. I said it may be a copycat of the Tylenol killers. You know what I'm saying? Come to find out, now we got the Excedrin killer. And come to find out, the Excedrin killer basically told on herself because, one, she thought her husband was bored and she felt like she had to kill him for some stupid ass reason because he was bored. And then on top of that, she wanted his freaking life insurance money. So when they freaking found out, this is just crazy too, y'all. I think this is one of the craziest parts, man. When she found out that she wasn't gonna get the money that she really wanted, not the whole policy or whatever, the whole return or whatever, because they ain't deem it as a freaking murder or whatever, something like that. That's when she decided to call the police to her freaking house and start explaining ish and doing all this and that, and what they got you, life in prison, time freaking 2. I'm glad she freaking did that. I'm glad Stella did that, man. like seriously. And now she got the audacity at the age of 81 trying to talk about compassion releases and stuff. I ain't never even freaking heard of no ish like that. What the hell is a compassion relief? Now, release. Now, I know what she mean. You know what I'm saying, BET? But I'm just saying, man, get the hell up out of here with that, man. Go on, man. You should have thought about that before you committed these freaking murders. And I guess in a way she wanted to make it look, it's like you almost kind of look at it like she didn't, the reason that you could also say why she was spreading it throughout town in different stores also, other than just her husband, was because she wanted to make it look like the Tylenol killer was potentially back. You can't say that too. You can't say that, but at the same time, man, it's just like, dude, you got literally caught with 2 of them in your possession. And there are only been 4 found out of all these thousands of freaking bottles. And you can't even halfway try to explain how that's a coincidence. That is not a coincidence. You got 2 of the 4 freaking cyanide bottles in your possession, in your home, in the same medicine cabinet. Nah, man, it's got to be you. It got to be freaking you. And one more thing I just want to say real quick, BET, I'm gonna go and let y'all go. It just makes me so happy that we living in like the year 2025, because you know nowadays, as far as like over the counter medicine, for the most part, like Excedrin that you take now, or Aleve, Tylenol, whatever, you know, a lot of time you can get the hard pill. You know what I'm saying? Like Excedrin don't even have capsules no more, I don't think. But you know what I'm saying? You get the hard pill, so people can't get away with putting goddamn cyanide inside the little soft capsule and putting it back together and stuff, because it's just a hard pill now. But that was just a side note real quick, man. I think that was a great safety measure that these medicine companies, or whatever you want to call it, started to take place, and I'm glad that it happened. But I digress. I'm gonna go and let y'all go, BET. I appreciate y'all coming on back as always. And before you leave, just please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that if you ain't did that yet. And remember this: love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.
If you're feeling lonely today, come along and throw your cares away. We're really glad that you're our friend, and this is a friendship that'll never ever end.
Run!